In the meantime, lawmakers returned to Albany this week to approve new gun laws after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the state's concealed carry rules last week. There will now be some new requirements to get a concealed carry license in New York. Applicants will have to go through new gun training and get an extended background check. Businesses will also have to opt in if they want to allow guns on their property. And guns will be banned in certain, quote, sensitive areas. Those are public places like schools, government buildings, and mass transit. Governor Hochul told reporters this week that the new law was written to withstand another lawsuit.
We know we have to make sure this is constitutional. We get that. We're not looking to go back into court. But we also know that we have more powers than people may realize, that we're going to institute those to make sure New Yorkers are safe.
All right, we're now at the Reporters Roundtable for more analysis of this week's news. And I'm happy to be joined after a long break by my colleagues and friends, Karen DeWitt from New York State Public Radio and Mike Gormley from Newsday. It's great to see you guys.
And great to have you back for your guest appearance.
Thank you. I thought I was out. They pulled me back in. All right. So let's examine some highlights from primary night. First, sticking with the Democratic side, Kathy Hochul, 8 months ago, everybody thought this was going to be a barn burner of a Tish James versus Kathy Hochul battle. She cruised.
Yeah, she really blew away her opponents, Jumaane Williams on the left, Tom Suozzi, who was more moderate to a right Democrat, and mostly cruised through the final weeks on two issues, abortion rights and gun safety, that became big national issues. She spent a lot of money that she has in her campaign running ads on those two issues. And more importantly, she actually got the legislature to do something on both of those issues. And they are still working on those two issues as we speak. So that really helped her. It's things that Democrats care about. I also think it was a pretty low turnout election. And so I think like the party faithful that came out that were dedicated to Hochul came out, and maybe some opposition to her did not come out in the same numbers that they have in the past.
And it's critically, below the top numbers, there's a great story there. If you remember over the last few years, the Democrats have had this internal fight, progressives pulling away, challenging, in primaries, the established Democrats. The established Democrats won almost every head-to-head competition this time. And that shows a lot of things. I talked to a lot of people about this. Newsday's having a story this weekend on it. But it shows that the Democrats, either the voters or the leaders, but probably the voters, came together. And probably a lot of it was the Supreme Court decisions. It was the January 6th commission hearings that are scary. All these other issues that are coming together, and Democrats said, wait a minute, as Jay Jacobs, the state chairman, Democratic chairman, said, it's time to end the squabbling. We got to get together because they've got a real threat, or they could have a real threat from the Republicans.
Well, intriguingly, Kathy Hochul on primary night after the returns were in said she thanked Jumaane Williams, who was, of course, as noted, her progressive opponent. Didn't say much at all about Tom Suozzi when prompted after she said, well, I look forward to working with Williams, and somebody said, are you looking forward to working with Tom Suozzi? And she said, well, he's not going to be in office.
Well, for a while he was calling her the interim governor, and I think that kind of got her back up with that, so she doesn't have a good relationship. And she's also practical. She's got to work with Jumaane Williams, so why antagonize him? And also, Hochul's not a polarizing figure the way her predecessor, Andrew Cuomo, was. She didn't go around saying antagonistic things about the left or progressives, or that she was the real progressive and they weren't, as Andrew Cuomo used to say. So I think that people didn't go out to vote against her. So that vote didn't happen.
So turning to the Republican side, another cruise, although perhaps a little bit bumpier, by Lee Zeldin, who stiff-armed a fairly energetic challenge from Andrew Giuliani.
Yeah, early in the night, I thought Andrew Giuliani might win because he was ahead and he had more name recognition. But Lee Zeldin pulled it off, and again, the party faithful came out and voted for him, and now he is the candidate to run against Hochul. And it's interesting how they both came out of the box trying to paint each other as extremists.
Yeah. Very strong on Long Island.
Yes, he won Long Island big, and he's from Long Island. The concern is, where does he go from here? Democrats have a better than 2-to-1 enrollment advantage, and mostly are left-leaning Democrats. And Lee Zeldin, the congressman from Shirley in Long Island, was very close to Trump refused to certify the election loss by Trump to Biden, there's an awful lot there that Democrats are going to jump on.
I also think his stance against abortion rights is really going to hurt him this year. Maybe in a different year where Roe v. Wade wasn't overturned, some voters might overlook that in favor of, yeah, we want less taxes, we're tired of inflation, we want the economy to be better. But I think that's going to be a big hurdle for him to get over. And that Hochul is going to really bring that out. She has more money than him. She can define him on this issue in a way that he can't because he doesn't have as much money and he's not as well known. So I think that's a really big stumbling block. And also that Democrats have a 2-to-1 enrollment advantage. It's quite a road.
I would say Karen brings up a very good point here. The Republicans are going to try to make this about rising crime, inflation, gas prices. That might not look good in June. But if that's still the case come November, there's a history of voters going into polls saying, I'm voting on what matters to me. That's what the Republicans are counting on. It'll be interesting to see what happens between now and then.
It's worth noting that just in terms of raw numbers, votes for Zeldin trailed votes for Hochul about 3-1. In other words, Hochul got, I think, just under 600,000. Zeldin, I think, around 180, thereabouts.
Yeah, to the point of there being more Democrats than
Exactly.
Republicans in the state, and that's only, that gap has only widened over time.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, too, though, the wild card in this is that Republicans are no longer the second largest bunch of voters in the state. They're third. There's the Democrats, and then there's independent, unenrolled voters. So that's the sweet spot. That's where both are going to try to get.
Okay, under the heading of what have you done for me lately, an extraordinary session was called on Thursday. Now, I preface this by saying we are talking just before 9 a.m. on Friday morning. So far, the legislature has gotten, I believe, nothing done, although they stayed up very late doing it. They're coming back in today, the Senate in the morning, the Assembly in the afternoon, to address guns and abortion.
Well, they do have the bills ready on fixing the state's concealed carry laws after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down New York's 100-year-old laws that placed restrictions on carrying a concealed weapon. So that came through around 3:30 in the morning. The bill language at least came out to reporters and the public. I'm sure that people were awake and waiting with bated breath to see that at 3:30 in the morning. And it looks like probably later Friday they will pass that. If the language is there, that means it's done. But a constitutional amendment enshrining abortion rights was not done as of Friday morning, though. The governor called it the additional special session for 2 p.m. on Friday. So I think with the holiday weekend approaching, that's going to be incentive for them to give up their differences over the language and just get it done today.
And the bigger picture here is we've got monumental forces, right? We've got the U.S. Supreme Court saying you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. We got the state legislature and Governor Hochul saying, so you say we can't do that, we're going to come back and have a concealed carry permit law for handguns that's going to be even more restrictive. So they're trying to really take advantage of the situation. This idea of having these sensitive areas where there'd be no guns allowed, that's a long list. That wasn't there before, but it's going to be in this bill. There's a lot of things that the legislature and Governor Hochul are trying to get into this bill. And the potential downside is that could be ruled unconstitutional as well, but they're giving it a good shot. That's why it's taking so long.
It kind of ends up being an opportunity for them in
Right.
disguise, because it's actually going to be a lot harder to get one of these permits than it was under the 100-year-old law.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that if the resolution for a constitutional amendment on abortion, it needs to be passed this year, before the end of summer, really, and then it would need to be passed by the next legislature, the one that will start in January, and then in November of 2023, conceivably, it could go before voters in the general.
Right, and if they hadn't done this, it would be not until 2025 that it could go before voters. Right. And they tried to do it at the end of the session earlier in June and failed, so there's been pressure to come back and come through on that.
And the pressure is partially, of course, this is an election year for the legislature, for the governor. This is a terrific talking point for Democrats to have. And remember, the way this is framed is not abortion is just a right. It's framed under you can't discriminate against people because they had abortions. So it's it's a good talking point for the Democrats.
Or a pregnant person
Correct.
can't be discriminated against. But it's hard to write. I mean, that has been, in fairness to them, been a holdup. Like, how do you put that in the Constitution?
Speaking of hard to write, the Supreme Court is not done making our lives interesting. They on Thursday, the last day that they issued anything, they said that in their next term, the justices will hear the appeals of Louis Simonelli, Buffalo developer caught up in the Buffalo billions scandal, and Joe Percoco, the former executive deputy secretary to the former governor, looking at points of the honest services law or the honest services statute in Percoco's case, and a rather arcane, I won't even begin to describe it, point of wire fraud law in the case of Louis Simonelli and Alan Calieros of SUNY Polytechnic.
Well, the honest services law applies if you're an employee of state government. And Percoco's now arguing that he wasn't an employee of state government because when he was stealing all that money, he was running Andrew Cuomo's reelection campaign.
Please, taking bribes, Karen.
Right,
There's a
and well, he
difference.
allegedly was taking the
Yeah.
money. Right, so that's what they're arguing on, which is kind of clever, I guess.
It's a very important. These are actually important cases, but they are arcane. The honest services law, as you guys both know, has been revised several times because it's a corruption standard.
Yeah.
So this will be interesting to watch.
All right. Well, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks very much. It's so good to see you both. Hope you got some sleep last night. Hope you have a busy Friday. Karen DeWitt of New York State Public Radio and Mike Gormley of Newsday.